So yeah, I believe I sent the questions over to you. I don't know if you gave them the read, but I mean, one of my first questions was just on the term of animism itself, really, because one of the things that surprised me, I mean, when I first started researching this, I wasn't quite aware of how complex of an issue it was and how much history there was behind the term itself. I mean, the usage of it in academia against, you know, as a, I don't necessarily want to use the word slur. I don't think that's appropriate, but it's like you know, it was misappropriated against Indigenous people.
Yeah.
That wasn't something I was completely unaware of, and I was just curious to whether or not you, as a contemporary shaman, you like are part of the group that believes that the term should be abandoned, as some do, or if you believe that it's one that should be reclaimed and utilized in a way that, you know, is respectful.
Good question. I mean, it's a good question, and it links, as you say, to other issues about cultural appropriation. You know, this is very much the thing that many people are thinking about these days. But, you know, to use the word animism, well, animism comes from Greek, animismos.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure, now I'm not an academic in that sense, but I would say that in all cultures, at some point, well, in all cultures, there's the concept of animism.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they may not use that word, they may not use Greek language, they might not use English language, but there is a concept of animism, and people will have an understanding that, as well as human beings, because we tend to think that we're the primary life force on the planet, but as well as human beings, but animals and plants have a life force, maybe a personality, maybe a soul, but that also, beyond that, things that we don't consider to have life in an organic way, like stones, like the wind, like the sun or the moon, that these have some sense of their own life force within them, a character, they behave, they will interact. For more ancient rooted indigenous cultures, these became part of their cosmology, because we all need to understand something. Even if we don't get it right, we need to have some map of understanding of the world that we live in.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so part of the way that I see this was created was, if you look at the things that are most important to people, and if we step back out of our sophisticated, central heated, air conditioned, electrified, everything that affects our environment can be controlled once you step inside the door of the house or your car. You know, you've got aircon in your car, temperature in your car. You can turn the headlights on the outside so you can see, and all that stuff, and all the stuff in the house. So where we don't have that, then it was important to have the best kind of information that we could, and particularly when we move from being perhaps hunter-gatherers or foragers to agriculture.
Mm-hmm.
And we started to establish our own bit of land. It's mine, you know? And so I want the crops to grow well. And I need to know, I suppose even with hunter-gathering, we need to know how long do we have to make our food last?
Mm-hmm.
And when are the new berries or whatever we're going to rely on for our food, when are they going to be harvestable, available? So we looked to the world around us. And one of the things that everyone can notice every day is the rising of the sun and the travel across the sky, the journey it makes, and the setting of the sun. And the sun was very important because the sun became part of it's the earliest calendar, the sun and the moon. But the sun would tell us when the summer is coming and when the long nights are coming.
Mm-hmm.
And so to get it on our side, we would have created or worked with the idea that it had some kind of personality we can engage with, something that we can pacify if the weather's bad and there's no sun, something that we can offer something to, our gratitude or prayers or sacrifices to say thank you. So whether everything has its own animistic life force or not, people stepped into a way of relating to everything in the world around them that embody that as part of the practice.
Yeah.
And so they look to the organizing principles of the universe, the organizing principles of the world that they lived in. And generally, they chose ordinary things from the world around them that helped to, that reflected it back to them. Yeah. Okay, physicists do the same thing. Slightly different language. So physicists are people, and scientists love to understand how things work. They talk about the organizing principles of the universe as being gravity, electromagnetism, weak nuclear force, like the power inside the atom, and strong nuclear force, the power inside the sun. And indigenous people, depending on what part of the world they lived in, they would have looked to the animal life around them and chosen animals that represented the living qualities of the world around them. And they saw them, I think, as living because they changed. They can be changeable day by day.
Yeah.
So they stepped into a relationship with the archetypes, and they recognized those archetypes as possibly being embodied by, for example, serpent, jaguar, hummingbird, eagle. Now, if you're in the Sami people, Eskimo people, you're not going to be working with the binding principle of the universe using the archetype of serpent, because in the more north you go or the more south you go, the colder it gets, and you don't find many reptiles. They just don't like it there. It doesn't work for them. So you will find in different traditions, different animals or animal spirits assigned to what they identify as the organizing principles of the universe. But because they look at them in, one would call it serpent, one something else. Some places you have a jaguar that represents also the aspect of us that is not just looking at things factually, but is looking at things with emotion and creating stories and out of our feelings. So although they may look different traditions, they're very similar in that they're working with what they see as the living force of the world around them. And it does beg a question: are they right? Are they wrong? Does the map work for them? I think the map works for them. It works for me. Animism for me is very part of my practice as a shaman. Yeah. So maybe I'll stop for a moment so you can.
It's quite all right.
Okay, another question, or guide me if I go off track.
No, it's all right. Developing on what you just said, actually. I mean, you say that animism is obviously a massive part of your practice of being a shaman. And I mean, at least my understanding of shamanism, I mean, I've not been able to do as much research into shamanism as I'd like. I've kind of been focused on the animism side because I've really not managed my time very well with this project, I'll be honest. But from my understanding, at least, I mean, the role of a shaman is to kind of mediate between people and those spirits. Am I right in saying that to an extent?
Yeah. And so that's their role. But the way a shaman lives is by living in an animistic relationship with the world around them. So when I'm working with someone, when I'm calling in sacred space, so at the beginning of my healing ceremonies and the beginning of my workshops or fire ceremonies, we call in our relationship with sacred space. We make it conscious. Some people like to describe it as creating sacred space. But then it suggests that, we're not in sacred space until we create it. And I think we're in sacred space in that everything is sacred, including us. But it's not always a conscious relationship. So the ceremony calls in the relationship, and we make conscious the life force of the world around us by relating to it through identities.
Yeah.
So behind me, where I'm sitting now, is the south. So as I begin, I'll call in the winds of the south Waira Sachamama, the winds of Sachamama, the great mother serpent, and invite them to come and be with us, and to participate. So to hold us sweetly in their golden coils of light, to help us participating, to shed our past sweetly and easily where it no longer helps us grow, just as it sheds its skin. So we're asking the world around us, the particular aspects of the world around us, to perform a certain role. So it's not just identifying it as being alive or having a life force, but it has a role to play, and we can engage it to our benefit to create harmony, or irony, as the Inca people say. In the West, I call on the essence of jaguar as an archetype. So jaguar is a mammal, like we are, and it has a next evolutionary stage of the brain. So I would imagine that the ancient indigenous cultures didn't have the same understanding that we have from our evolved biological sciences about what the difference is in reptilian, amphibian, mammalian brains, higher mammals, humans, whales, dolphins, what those differences actually mean. But of course, science again, and shamanism, which is animistic. Shamanism is an ancient science.
Okay.
So ancient shamanism, more traditional, of people who've never been contacted by Western people, Europeans, North Americans, all of these kinds. They still have a science, but they wouldn't use that word. But they have an understanding of the nature of the world around them. Okay, I mean, I could go on and carry on talking about the archetype, but to give you an idea, each one is different. The hummingbird, I am going to carry on and talk about it.
No, feel free, honestly. It's recording, so I can always go back, which is great.
Sure. For the Inca people, hummingbird is an archetype that they never really related to.
Okay.
They saw that the hummingbird represented something. But up until the height of the Inca civilization about 600 years ago, these people were incredibly strong. They were nourished and fed by incredibly fertile lands that sometimes have 4 main crops a year, definitely 3. Here, we're lucky if we get 2. So the Sacred Valley of the Incas, from Cuzco all the way down to Machu Picchu, where the cloud forest and the jungle starts. This was such a rich and fertile land. They always had plenty. And so they were strong and they were well fed. I guess their gene pool, they were strong people anyway. And they didn't have to identify with an archetype that represented change and evolution and growth, because they didn't really need to think about it. There was so much stability in their world. But when they saw their world literally turning upside down, and this also comes from their cosmology, they talk about what they describe as Pachacuti, when the world turns upside down. So they anticipated a time when everything would change, and they go from a cycle of light, abundance, like day, not light and dark, like good and bad, but day and night. At night, or summer and winter, everything goes quiet. It rests. It hibernates. So they saw that their growth would go underground, disappear. And once they'd worked out what the arrival of the Spanish meant in South America, and they saw it portrayed in the stars and other signs of the living world around them that made sense to them, the world was speaking, then they realized that it was time to go. So they left Cuzco, they went to the mountains. No one knew where they were for 600 years. No one could find them. They became a myth. And they realized that they needed to be able to call on something that helped them to hold harmony and balance in their lives, Aini in their lives. And so they started to work with the 4th, although it kind of goes southwest, north, 1, 2, 3. They saw that this was its place. This is where it was going to emerge. And the hummingbird, or the colibri, represents for them change and evolution and growth. As an animal, it has the qualities of being able to move forwards, backwards, left, right, like a little helicopter. Other birds can't do that. it can hover. It's very precise in that it knows exactly where to go. And that's how it appears. It's 1 second it's here, and then it's off, it's gone. But it seems to arrive as its favorite flowers open at particular times during the day. So it needs to be in exactly the right place at the right time. So because the animal does this, or appears to do this, okay, so this is another thing. Is the animal doing it, or is our relationship with the animal, which we think of as animistic, does it allow us to understand or to create or to download from somewhere a new mythology? And it's the new mythology is what helps us.
Okay.
So animism can be a concept that if we, reach out with, I'm kind of with my octopus-like tentacles to bring these other bits in, I hope it makes sense about why animism is important in a way of living rather than a just theoretical thing. Okay.
Yeah, that's one of the things I found. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there. It's just like that's one of the things I found most interesting about this is that it's not just a theoretical thing, as you say. It's more of a worldview. It's an understanding that I think one of the things that I find most inspiring about it is the level of respect that it generates, and that's kind of why I linked it to the climate issue, which is kind of what our focus is on with this assignment. Is that having that understanding and having that relationship with these creatures, with these beings, whether it be animals or plants, or that generates like a level of respect that we, as for example Western individuals, just simply don't have. I mean, the way that we've been treating the environment over the last few decades, if not centuries, is completely antithetical to the kind of respect that you see.
Yeah, we talk about the Mother Earth, so just pulling that one out of the air. No, would we treat our mother the same way we treat the Mother Earth? Yeah.
Absolutely not. Now, I hope
we walk all over her, but do we say thank you? Perhaps not so much. The earth, or we might think that we create the crops, we sow the seeds, we harvest them, we water them, we modify the food genetically to be more abundant and more resistant to pests. And we've created. We haven't created. No, we've done. Well, we've kind of created ourselves as gods, as masters of our universe. But we haven't come to grips with the fundamentals of living in relationship with the world that we find ourselves walking on. And so I think the issues, the climate issue, they are issues, but it's also part of the theme. And the theme helps us to understand the mythology within which we live. So our mythology as Westernized people is something like, I deserve to have as much as I want. There will always be more than enough, and I don't have to put anything back in order to keep receiving. Or, it's like the Homer Simpson cartoon. There's a lot of wisdom in the Simpson family cartoons.
Oh, there is. I mean, Matt Groening was actually a philosophy student before he started doing animations and things like that. That was his major in university.
Yeah, speaking to people, it doesn't seem to reach them sometimes. They're making a cartoon. And Homer has this episode. It's about taking out the garbage, the rubbish, and his catchphrase becomes, "Can't someone else do it?" And it becomes his speech, his motto, his tagline for his campaign as mayor. Everyone loves the idea. Everyone is asking, what are you going to do about refuse, garbage? What are you going to do about schools? What are you going to do about the problem of education? Well, can't someone else do it? And of course, it somehow engages with a part of the thinking of the cartoon crowd that appeals to people. So they vote him as the man who's going to get someone else to do everything and do nothing into the place of being mayor. And, we have the G20 summit or something going on. And then there's another thing. Right now, all these things about, what's the one I'm looking at this morning? about the future of global food production and how it's going to be managed by large corporations with possibly, you know, a lot of kind of robotic farming. So are we going to feed the world? Are we going to feed the world at a price? I think we're at a tipping point. And being able to step into something of an animistic relationship with the world we live in, understanding its fragility. All life is fragile, even human life. We might be able to repair and replace parts of our body, but everything that lives dies. And if we kill this planet because we don't understand how to keep her alive, then there may not even be enough time to regret it.
Yeah.
You know, but unless we take animism, I think, you know, so I have a lot of opinions and beliefs, and they may only be valid for me. But unless we take animism and embody it within a culture that makes sense, then it's just a concept. And we will think about it and debate it and talk about it and write about it, but it's never going to make that big journey down to the heart or to our body and start to think about what is it that I really feel is the right thing for me to do to live in harmony and balance with the world around me. Okay. So ancient people have many mythologies. Our contemporary mythologies are, you know, some of them are Disney focused. We have heroes and villains from all of our movies. Hollywood is great at doing this, but to the large degree, they've all been sanitized. And all the scary bits of fairy stories have been taken out.
No, indeed. I mean, if you look at Grimm tales.
Yes, Grimm stories. If you look at the original versions written down, they're very different. Okay, and there is light and dark and everything, and it has to be in balance. But if we have stories that inspire us to live in a harmonious way that respects that everything has life, then we change the way we live. If we change the way we see the world we live in changes.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay. That makes sense.
So,
you know, it just
you mentioned about stones.
Yes, I did. I remember, because that was one thing I found particularly about the Ojibwe people that I was reading about, and how you know, they, in their grammatical language, they actually see stones as well. Grammatically, they're treated as if they're animate, and you know, they interact, they can speak to. And there was one particular story where an elder of the tribe, when Hallowell was visiting them, and I'm not exactly sure where it was in the book. I've not put a bookmark in it, but I'm trying to remember what it was. But I remember he did something that directly spoke to it, and it was something to do with whether or not it had been part of the pavilion that he built, and that he was able to tell by merely interacting with it whether or not it had been. And I was going somewhere with that, but I've lost my train of thought.
Shall I tell you a story?
Yes, please.
Tell you a story? Okay, I can reach over and get my mesa. So I'll put that there. So this is my medicine bundle, and it contains my healing stones, my kuyas. I might come back to that in a minute. But the mythology of the people in the Aymara region of Peru, up high around Lake Titicaca in the Altiplano, they talk about the star beings, the visitors to Earth who came and lived with and worked amongst the indigenous people. And they taught them about agriculture, and they taught them about stones. So they taught them how to work with stones, how to transform stones into healing stones, which hold something of the shaman's life force energy, but also learn, if you like, at the vibrationary level, how to work with particular kinds of healing. So I know, I was working with a lady by distance the other day, one of my students, and because we're not in the same room, she's in one of the Greek islands. She opened her medicine bundle and she chose one of the stones to work with. If she'd been with me, she would have chosen one of the ones from my mesa. So I chose one here. And I was very carefully choosing and wondering which one to take. And I was curious which one she had, but I could track, just as a hunter tracks through the snow or the leaves or the mud, the footprints. Okay. I was able to track which stone she was working with. I could hear it talking to me, telling me it comes from the north of the medicine wheel. And I knew immediately which of the three processes the three individual stones go through belong to. But moving away from stones for a moment, because I got every time I come back from Peru, I've got kilos of stones in my suitcases. Strangely, people don't seem to think it's familiar. I stayed with my friend in Athens some years ago, and he's a chef. I'm not a chef, but I like to make bread, and we sometimes talk about making bread. And it said, can I bring him some artisan flour, special milled flour? And I couldn't find what he was looking for, but I brought him some flour. And so maybe this talks a little bit about how animism works. So I'd put these flour, all right, in its paper wrapped exactly as it comes from the supermarket, inside a plastic Ziploc bag, in case some of the flour leaked out. I put them in my suitcase and slept well that night at the hotel, organized the movies I was going to watch on the plane on my iPad. I thought, download a bunch of new movies. So I did that. And then I got to the airport. I self-scanned my suitcases in, and I felt a strange feeling about my case as it went off. And I thought, okay, maybe nothing, but if you live in an animistic relationship with the world around you, including your suitcase and the scanner, you're going to pick up when there is a slight wobble of vibration and wonder what it is. So I breezed through the rest of the check-in and the fast track and everything else, and sitting in the lounge having a glass of wine and relaxing before my flight. And then I go down, I come to the check-in, and it's just a little bit different. I'm just noticing the difference. The guy didn't look at my passport. I just walked up to an empty, like this post with a scanner on top, put my passport down, scanned it, and walked through, and he stood beside me. And I felt like he missed something. I wasn't quite sure what. Anyway, I got on the plane, I sat down, and opened up my iPad, and I put the movie on. I'm just starting to watch the movie. And as I'm starting to watch the movie, this very, what's the word? It's under a bit of pressure. The guy from the check-in comes on the plane. And I'm in business class, about 3 seats from the front of the plane. So I just look up and I see him. He doesn't belong on the plane. He's not air crew. You know, he's not one of the guys who comes in and they sign off to say, look, I confirm the plane has got petrol in it or something. He's from over there. And I'm thinking, for me, these are little ripples. And he walked up to me and he said, excuse me, sir, can I just check you're in the right seat? May I see your passport? So I said, yeah, okay. And again, it's all just a little bit unusual. And I gave him my passport. He said, thank you very much. Now, for me, that means he can see that the person sitting in the seat looks like the person in the passport.
Yeah.
Simple thing. But I could have sat in a different seat. You know? He got off the plane. I finished watching my movie. Well, I carried on and arrived in Athens. Went straight through the check-in, got my suitcases, got picked up by my friends. Later that day, I take the bags of flour out of the suitcase, out of their plastic bags, and put them on the worktop for my friend. And I notice inside the plastic bag is a little bit of flour. And I thought, that's odd. It was like a little bit more than you would have found just dropped off the outside of the packet.
Yeah.
Anyway, I didn't pay attention to it too much, but then I looked at the top of the 1 kilo flour bag, and there's a little bit of plastic tape, sellotape, and underneath is a tiny, tiny slit that you'd make with a knife. So, this is all interesting, but you wait till the punch.
Oh, I've got an idea of where
Right.
this is going.
Okay, so someone had scanned the suitcase, seen these suspicious-looking parcels. Before the plane had taken off, they'd taken a sample of what was in there. Immediately, they would have known that it was just flour.
Yeah.
But sometimes they get suspicious. Someone might be doing a trial run. Let me take some flour this time and something else next time. And then they sealed it up. No, and everything was fine. So we can track things consciously, and we can be impacted unconsciously by what we're tracking, what we're sensing. What made me smile was the movie that I chose to watch was a Johnny Depp movie, and it's called Blow. I don't know if you've seen it. Yeah?
I haven't, no, but yes.
It's all about how this guy, he starts off with cannabis, but then ends up smuggling huge amounts of cocaine from South America into the United States. I could have it was a new movie to my iPad. I downloaded 5, I think. I could have watched any of them, but that's the one I chose. So living in an animistic relationship with the world around you helps to make these things visible. Yeah. When I'm working with my clients for healing sessions, particularly I look to the south. So the south will tell me, this is my animistic relationship. It shows me the facts of a situation. And if there is something strange happens when I say the prayer to the south, or I jumble my words up, I know there is something that is being presented as fact that isn't fact. In the West, it's all about the mammalian brain, the cortex, where we have the fight-flight response. We remember things, and we create our picture of the world and our anticipation of what's going to happen next by what's happened in the past. It's all about emotion, thoughts, and feelings. And a lot of people will disagree with this until I'm going to say they work it out, but we generally mix up the facts with our beliefs, what we're telling ourselves with what's actually happening, which leads to a huge amount of upset or overexcitement. We get excited about something that isn't going to happen. There's no factual basis for it, or we get upset about something or afraid because we're worried about something, but it's not going to happen unless we create it, we make it happen. We make the upset happen because we think every time our dad goes out the door, he's going to leave and not come back, because that's been the story he abandoned once as a child or something. It taps on old stories. And we get caught in these two ways of thinking and living in the world, which is why the Inca wanted to work with this third archetype, change and evolution and growth, which the hummingbird then helps us to see a bigger picture. The condor that sits in the east, if you think, it's right up there in the sky. In fact, it doesn't even fly. Not really. It's gliding everywhere. And it changes direction just by lifting a couple of feathers at the end of the wing. It's like perfectly gliding. So it's at the most etheric level of the 4 archetypes that we relate to, whereas the serpent is so down to earth. There's no emotion, no imagination. It's just facts. And you may have had this experience, but if you're having a conversation with someone and they are totally fact-based, no middle ground, no maybe, they probably make really good accountants. There is a movie called The Accountant, and the guy starts off as a child with a lot of autistic-like behavior, and is brought up in a very rigid environment by a military father. And of course, he learns a lot of fighting skills, which become the drama in the movie. But he's also an accountant, but he's an accountant for the mob, this kind of thing. But it's like to be able to look just at the facts and to analyze just the facts without bringing in story, or to be able to know the difference between the facts and our imagination. And because we need help to do it, we go to the world around us. And so having an animistic relationship with the world around us, because human beings, we're really good at projecting things. All right. Sometimes you project something onto someone, and we give away our gold. We give away our light. We say, David Beckham is amazing at football. I wish I could be that good, but you know, that's because he is David Beckham. It's the only one. And we lose touch with our skills, our creativity, our imagination, because perhaps we've been told we're not good enough in that way, and we project it onto someone. Or love. Love is another good example about projection. I love you. You're lovely. And when actually the truth is, I feel lovely when I'm with you. I feel this. It's actually got nothing to do with you. It's because of how I feel. So we get it all jumbled up. So using projection, we can project things out into the world. The serpent will show us the facts. The jaguar will show us the story, the emotion. The hummingbird will show us the bigger picture. The condor will help us to feel, to sense the energy in things. Yeah. And then they become, maybe that is exactly what they are, but they become those things for us. So animism is a way of looking at the world, a way of living. I have a belief that there is an animistic life force in everything. The world speaks to me in so many different ways. It gives me information when I'm working with my clients. As a shaman works with their stones in their mesa, then the mesa becomes a portrait of the shaman. When I want to know what's going on in my life, if something's happening and I don't quite get it, I open my mesa and I look at my stones. I create order, mesa mastai, ordering my stones and moving them around. And I know also what's happening for me shows up here, and what's happening here I experience too. So if I want to bring abundance into my life, then I put something symbolic. I'll blow into it. Corn for the Inca was what represented abundance. So I'll put some dry corn into my mesa. And then I just watch as abundance flows towards me.
Okay.
Yep. So it could be a theory. You could try it out as a practice and see. Roses for love. Some people, you know, if you're feeling really kind of run down and sludgy, you open your mesa and you go, oh, well, that's why. It's full of things I put in there and they've just gone rotten. I opened my mesa with one of my students the other day, and for a change, so there's an inner cloth and an outer cloth. There are some pouches with things in them, depending on what I'm working with at that time. So one of the pouches used to sit in with the stones, but I put it between the two cloths. It was underneath. And so as the cloths, one on top of the other, the second cloth, the inner cloth, rose up a bit because it had this pouch underneath it, and it created a kind of dome effect. And usually I put my stones into a circle around them or into the shape of the Andean cross, okay, which works with the 4 directions. It's a meditation that helps me to see the relationship with time and space, past, present, future. And all of the corn that usually sits in the middle couldn't sit in the middle. It had rolled because of the dome effect underneath. So I could look at it and say, oh, that's my mistake, my fault for putting that thing in there. Now it's not balanced. Now it's not right. But I see that everything is perfect just the way it is. But I sat and I looked at this and I thought about it for a while because my focus really was on working with my student. And I started to look at other things. You know, I've been incredibly busy with work. I've had, in the last 2 weeks, I've had about a month's worth of work. And I thought, well, I can't carry on working at that pace. But of course, I can't carry on working at that pace because next week I'm away teaching and it's a completely different pace. And I've been seeing signs about this teaching program. So I'll tell you that in a second, but I looked at this and I looked at the other stories in my garden. Okay, I've been putting birdseed out for the birds and all the birds were coming and eating this, lovely. And then I realized that also the squirrel was coming. But I kind of like the squirrel. The squirrel does very exciting things like stares and looks at the problem and then approaches it. How am I going to get to the top of that pole and hang upside down to get the fat balls? So he's doing this. I don't mind that. But then I'm seeing rats in the garden, and I decided I didn't want the rats in the garden. And suddenly there were 3 of them. I think they're coming from a couple of gardens up, but they were here. So I got rid of the food, but I still miss feeding the birds. And outside my bedroom window, so the house is this wide, but half width is the flat roof of the kitchen, and then the other side is a sloping plastic roof. So I realized I could throw seed out onto the flat roof and the birds would come and eat it. And I started to see unusual things I've never seen. So there were sparrows, and there were fledgling sparrows able to fly, but they've not been long out of the nest.
Yeah.
And so the mother and father birds were picking up seed, and the little one was kind of at its mouth open going, feed me, feed me, feed me. And so they were feeding it. And I began to see how, and then the squirrel makes it onto the roof. The squirrel comes as well. Everything is benefiting from this abundance of food. And when I thought about my mesa, I realized actually what it's showing me as I interpret it is that all the corn, all the abundance is rolling towards me.
Yeah, fair enough.
Okay, so if you begin to look at the world in that way, it changes the way you see the world you live in, changes the way you feel, changes what I think about whether I need to do extra work so that if I have a week off, I've got the money to pay for my week off. All of these different things, it changes the world you live in because you change the way you see the world that you live in. I see it as abundant and supportive. I could see, looking at my mesa, I could say, oh, it's all in the wrong place. And I could look at my life or the world as somehow jumbled up and all in the wrong place. But that's, for me, this time, that's a less helpful mythology to live with. So I think animism informs our lives in so many different ways. A really important part is helping us to create new living mythologies.
I'm just going to write that down, but yes.
You can play the recording back.
No, of course, yes. I'm just trying to take a few notes just so I know what to refer back to in the recording. It's helps me to kind of remember what's been said.
Okay, so you could look at what you're doing in a kind of cognitive way and say that everyone has learning styles, that you're a person who likes to write things down. Then you've got it so you can remember it because you believe you might forget it. It's a belief. Or animistically, you could say the process of writing down, engaging myself with a pencil and a piece of paper helps me to create something. And whether I read the paper or not later, I'll be able to remember it. So everything we do is part of this living animistic experience. You have life, the pencil has life. They may not speak back to you, but the process of engaging with them changes what you remember. It changes the future. In the future, you will be able to remember this because you wrote it down, even if you don't read it.
No, indeed. And I find that's one thing specifically on the back of writing that with information, I mean, it's so easy for it to just flow in and out. You hear something, you process it as you hear it, and then it kind of goes to the short-term memory, which, get wired when you sleep or however it works. But actually taking that information and creating something with it, whether it be a form of writing, definitely helps you remember it in terms of trying to think of how to word it. It's just simply the act of engaging with it rather than simply observing with it, because the observation of something is limiting, whereas in with it and actually interacting with it allows you to develop a greater understanding, at least think about it a little hard.
Do you want to take it a stage further? So,
go on.
Have you seen some of these Neolithic cave paintings?
Potentially a few, yeah.
Yeah, or you know that they exist, that there are cave paintings attributed to our deep time ancestors. Yeah. Now, our modern archaeologists interpret these for us and tell us that the scene that looks like a hunt, antelope, buffalo, stick figures with spears, this was painted to memorialize a great hunt that saw the people through a terrible winter, something like that. Yeah. So this story makes sense. We do the same things. We take photographs of anniversaries, birthday parties, everyone in the car able to escape to the country. You know, Boris has said, you can go on holiday. So we take the first holiday photos to memorialize them. Now, if you ask a shaman, any shaman worth their salt, when they look at these paintings, they say, no, it's not what happened. Probably what happened is the leaders of the community went to the shaman, sangoma, medicine person, whatever they're called, and they said to them, we need a big hunt. You have to help us as the medicine person. So the shaman would go into their dream state in whatever way they did that. Some would use chanting, some inhaling smoke from herbs or just a fire. Indian shaman yogis might use pranayama breathing practices and meditation. You might drink something that you've prepared that alters your consciousness, that you access a visionary or dream state in some way. And it was the shaman's job to call the animals to where they needed them to be. So if you think about it, if a shaman can come back to the community and say, I know where the buffalo are going to be in 3 days. Right, so I know where the buffalo are now. Yeah, that's great. But by the time you get to where the buffalo are, they've moved, they've gone. So then you spend the next few days walking in buffalo poo, following the buffalo. And you can do it like that. But the shaman would say, I know where the buffalo are going to be in 3 days. And they paint it because they call the buffalo into this place, into this valley, into this open plain. And then they say, so it's going to take us 2 days to walk there. Buffalo are here. They're going to be there. We are here. So we don't go there and across. We just go direct there. So they get up, they go, they sit down, they rest, they get all of their hunting things ready. And when the buffalo come, no one is surprised. So the painting calls the buffalo because you can call the buffalo because we live in an animistic environment. When you dream the buffalo to be here, that's where they will turn up.
Okay.
It's a little bit, it requires some rethinking.
Yeah, it does. I mean, I'm someone who is quite secular, so this kind of interpretation is not I can relate to just yet. I think the thing I struggle with this particular example is the idea of calling. I mean, I can understand the personhood of the buffalo and how we can interact with that, but it's the sense of almost predicting where they're going to be. I mean, is that based on some prior knowledge of the buffalo's movements, or
that would make you could do it that way? Yep. What is the and this is how we live. So there's a movie with Russell Crowe, and the name of it eludes me, but he's a mathematician, and he has a kind of breakdown. And the story of the breakdown and the people that he sees all the way through his journey with his mental health, they keep cropping up until he realizes, after many years of seeing them and responding to them, that they never get any older. But going back to his time at university as a student, or whatever his place in the faculty was, he was trying to create an algorithm to understand the movement of crows.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so you can see the food is on the ground. If you put food on the ground, crows are more likely to come. But if there's no food on the ground, they might come anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But how many come? How many come to feed? What's their pattern of engagement? Do they all get the same amount? And in the story, he was to be applauded because 20, 30, 40 years down the line, students of international commerce, the exchanges, the markets, they were using his algorithm to understand modern markets and how they behaved.
Mm-hmm.
So we can do this at the level of the mind. And then animism is a concept. But indigenous people who live closer to the land organize the information that they collect in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
A different way to us. So we organize things through facts. And they live in a relationship where they feel the world around them and they respond intuitively, instinctively. And it does not make sense. Yeah, because the mind's language is words and the body's language is feelings.
Mm-hmm.
So animism is something you can have a conceptual understanding of, but you will never understand it as fully as you can do unless you experiment and step into some kind of practice relationship with the world around you to see what your experience is.
Mm.
My sister is a scientist, and you know, we've got very similar gene pool that we come from, same parents, same house, same upbringing, but she sees things scientifically, modern science, facts, and for example, will ask me, where is the peer-reviewed evidence to support the things that I say? And I say, well, you know, these things are created from my beliefs and opinions, and they come from my lived experience. So I said, you know, there is a lot of stuff written about shamanism and animism, but, you know, if you really want to know, have the experience.
Mm.
But she likes it nice and neat and tidy in a box, but, you know, that box is never going to get any bigger.
No.
Yeah. Because you can only get so much stuff in it. And that box is the reality that we live in. And my idea is that my box is very stretchy and is continually having to grow to include the new information that I'm getting from the world around me as it expands and speaks to me in a way that allows me to stretch the way that I see and live in this world in a way that I can work with and accept. So I get things a little bit at a time, but I like to think that I also get quantum steps in learning and understanding because that's what the universe provides me with. Anyway, we can go on to all sorts of other areas.
No, it's right. I mean, I just had a question that came into my head. I mean, you and your sister, I mean, as someone myself who is more secular, how would I start to practice that myself then? I just as you know, what could I do or change? I mean, obviously you'd have to know. I start to engage with that as someone who has never really engaged with it before. Is there a place to start that you would think of? That'll be the right question.
Yeah, let's have a think. Well, I have my way of doing it. I have a path that I can show people. And in a way, it's the same way that I would have approached this question when I was teaching yoga. So yoga works for me. I can share it with you, and you can have the experience of how it changes your life. So you might think that by practicing the asana, okay, it changes your body. and your body will then, you become maybe a bit more relaxed, less stressed, or lose some weight, or your blood pressure goes down, things you're aiming for. But also, it has other effects. And so you begin to think a little bit differently, feel a little bit differently. And the thoughts and the feelings change the way you see the world around you. So the world around you, as far as you're concerned, changes because you don't see it the same way. Equally, I have a path that I teach for people who are interested in the way of the shaman. And it is a combination of the personal healing journey and also learning the healing skills, tools, and traditions of the shamans. And it adds another dimension. So as we work to heal the places in our life that are still traumatized, hurt from our past, it releases that energy. It means we don't get triggered in the same way by the same things. Often we don't realize we get triggered by other things because we think it's all about what's going on around us. It's got nothing to do with me. Every time someone walks out the door, every time you hear raised voices, every time you're worried a child is going to be hit, it triggers your imprint of the heavy energy that could not be released all in one go, of when whatever happens in your life happened to you once or over and over. Small things that happen over, seemingly small things that happen over and over, have sometimes a bigger effect, a cumulative effect than one trauma. And sometimes a small trauma that follows a large trauma has more effect than the initial trauma. There was a lady as a child, she was in a car accident with her mother. And when she kind of unpicked it, it wasn't the car crash that traumatized her and led to her anxiety about her mother. It was that after the crash, her mother was taken away and put into an ambulance. And, maybe there was someone else with her, but her mom went off on her own in the ambulance. And it was the abandonment of her mother, or the lack of presence of her mother, who was going to the right place and having medical attention. And the little girl was okay, really, but she still needed her mum to be there. So it was the secondary incident that created the greatest trauma. So when we're no longer impacted by the wounds, the traumas of our past, then it changes the way we see the world around us. It changes the way we engage with everything that happens.
Yeah, that makes sense.
A big part of it. So it's like this is living interaction with the world around us, with everything. Everything speaks. And the path of a shaman, very much, I think, on the path of a yogi, but definitely the path of the shaman is about coming into a relationship with the world around us, which is animistic. But otherwise, everyone has to have a relationship with the world around them, even if it's all of that's got nothing to do with me. And then that informs the way people drive their cars to work, the way they get in the elevator to go up to their office, the way they sit on the tube or the underground. It's all about me. I'm more important. No one else matters. I don't need anyone. I'm independent. It's like Hugh Grant in when he plays that part in About a Boy, and his sister is criticizing him, and she says, no man is an island. He says, I'm a whatever island. She says, I'm Ibiza. We can imagine we're islands, but we are still impacted by the world around us.
Of course.
And so if we are sending out into the world our belief that we're an island and we're isolated and no one can have any connection with us unless we consent to it, agree with it, organize it, then the world will reflect in a living and actual way the isolation that we're experiencing, that we're projecting out into the world. So if all of this happens, if all of this is possible, why not create a relationship that nourishes you, that feeds back to you?
Rather than perpetuate.
Yeah. I think sometimes it's because people don't know that it's possible. There aren't enough people in the same street or next door. For example, you think about how we first met, our first conversations. You know, how was that organized? You've had a need to do interviews to support your course, and who's to say that your need that you're wondering about, thinking about, isn't exactly what attracts people into your life by unexpected and unusual means? Because the world around you hears you and says, okay, we'll find a way to bring the hunt, the buffalo, to you.
Yeah, that
Or
makes
we
a
can
lot of
say
sense.
it's all, yeah, or it's all chance and coincidence, and you know, it's nothing we can do. But when you have a lived experience, then you begin to wonder. Yeah. And then you say, I wonder how else that can work, how else that can show up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. How are we doing for time for you?
We are on 10 past 2. I mean, I'm all right with time. I've got plenty. I've got nothing I've got planned. Not until the late afternoon anyway.
How are we doing with your questions?
I think your question, like the big question I should probably ask is, yeah, not too bad. I mean, we've kind of gotten through. We've also touched on elements of others as we've been going. I mean, I think probably the biggest question I have in terms of like relating this back to the climate change thing is this animist worldview, and you know,
you might have to say this again because the connection has just dropped a bit.
Actually, from having an animist worldview changes your relationship with the world, and clearly, from what I'm understanding, it's improved your level of respect for the environment around you and the persons, both whether that be human, plant, animal, external, that live within them. But do you believe that potentially spreading or teaching more people about this animist worldview would change the way? I'm just trying to. Do you think it would be an effective way to combat climate change? Because I think one of the problems we have with it is that people are just very selfish, as you said. I mean, they see themselves independent. Why can't someone else do it? That kind of thing. And do you think that teaching that worldview would change that?
Not necessarily, no.
Fair enough.
No. And I think about selfishness, I think people have the capacity to be selfish. And there are many situations where that's appropriate. So if I don't feed myself first, then I may not be available to feed other people. I might not have the strength to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's about balance. I think offering people another perspective, has the potential for being very useful. It's the lived experience that often changes people's lives more, or being so close to extinction. And how close do we have to get? If you look back at our past history, the worry about particular animals disappearing on the face of the planet, there's never been enough concern to stop it happening. So there's a lot of momentum behind human behavior. So what if that momentum isn't just about us and our behavior? There's been a lot of interest in the ancient calendars, the Aztec, Olmec, Mayan, Toltec, Inca calendars, and what their gift to us might be, what they actually mean. So the Mayan calendar, if you draw it, it's like a series of steps, but it's like a pyramid.
Mm-hmm.
The earlier, more historically distant ages, which have a place. We have to go through that age to get to the next one. They're longer, they take slower to go through, less happens over time. So you have millions and millions, billions of years for the Earth to begin to cool. And then life starts to appear, and that takes some time. There's evolutionary stages, and you can plot the Mayan calendar against our brief history of time from the human being's point of view, what we've written down, what we remember, what we know. And you discover curious things like the physical evidence for the acquisition of the skill of making fire, not just running to the bush that's been hit by the lightning, grabbing a burning stick and bringing it back into the cave before it burns out and then keeping the fire going. That's using resources, but not knowing how to make fire. The skill of making fire, which is evidenced, as I understand it, in Neolithic remains, it occurred just before the advent of the last ice age. So the suggestion is that however we came to learn that skill, had we not learned that skill, our ancient ancestors hadn't learned it then, we might not have survived. There might not have been enough of us to survive. So it seems to suggest, as I look at, and as the the understanding, the interpreters of the Mayan calendar in the traditional sense say, we get what we need just before we need it. So it suggests there's something else going on. Now we're looking at climate change, or catastrophic climate change potentially, as a consequence of human behavior, industrialization. And we're seeing it as a problem. All right, I can understand that. The different languages relate to the cultures of different peoples. And different people with different cultures all over the globe look at life differently. People who look at things scientifically, we might value their point of view more because it fits more with what we do generally in the West. People who don't make machines or build houses, but who travel as hunter-gatherers through the forests, people in Borneo, they don't, what do they contribute to us? They're a novelty factor. And yet, their non-attachment to the homes that they don't make, the homes that we make, the way that they live, knowing where the food is. So Bruce Parry, nice guy, I've met him. He's made a series of movies, by the BBC, the first ones that I recall. And he went and met with indigenous people in South America and experienced their culture and their plant medicines. So it's one of the first ways that ayahuasca ceremonies exploded onto the TV, with some unglamorous footage of him in the middle of his process, vomiting a lot and telling everyone what was going on. But he made this movie, his own movie, called Tawai. And it's about the Penan people, who are exactly this. And they're, because of deforestation due to mining and palm oil production, their habitat is disappearing. And because they cannot evidence the history of their people in that land, because they don't build permanent structures, their government is saying, we can't recognize your indigenous right to these lands and protect them for you. So he made the movie to preserve that story. But one of the things is, someone asked him once, when do you know particular fruits are going to be ripe? Because in the jungle, you can't see them. They're a day's walk that way. But you walk to where the food is. Otherwise, it's a wasted walk, maybe. You need to get food for the people. And they said, well, like almost puzzled, because the yellowbird knows. So when the yellowbird flies, we know the fruit is ready. So the yellowbird, maybe the yellowbird scientifically it flies at a certain time of the year. Maybe it migrates. What do they actually mean? I don't know. But the yellowbird knows. So when, instead of going and send someone to go and look and squeeze the tomatoes or the pineapples, are they fresh? They say the bird knows. So the bird will tell us.
Yeah, fair enough.
the way we engage with the world, the way we interpret the world, instead of saying, well, you know, David Bellamy would say, when such and such ornithopterus cali yellow floweris, I don't know, whatever that's supposed to mean, when it flies in a certain direction at a certain time of year, we know that the climate is humid, warm, changing, and that's the right climate for this plant. But they don't have this scientific knowledge. They know that when the bird flies, it's telling them, it's speaking to them.
Mm-hmm.
And so because you have this animistic relationship, it allows us to look at other signs from the world around us and to wonder, you know, what is the language they're speaking? Now, we write our things down, our cultures have different alphabets. And so we're looking at a crisis of climate change.
Mm-hmm.
It could mean the end of all life as we know it, you know, something like that. We write crisis, 6 letters in a straight line. The Chinese write it as 2 pictographic symbols. Each of those symbols has a meaning. One, crisis, means danger, and the other is opportunity.
All right.
So while we're protesting about the danger of erosion, of global warming, we need to see the opportunity. Otherwise, the public protests are missing the point. It's not about stopping what's happening. It's about using it as an opportunity, and that opportunity could be we change the way we live. Human beings are really good at solving problems.
Mm-hmm.
It's what we use to define who we are. We're taught to solve problems from an early age, but it means we are educated to see everything as a problem. If we saw it as an opportunity, the way we would engage with it is different.
Of course.
We use a different part of our brain. It's a problem. Okay, immediately, I will go to how I have solved problems in the past. What's been like this in the past? What did we do last time? What worked? We need something new. Well, where are we going to get a new idea from? And new ideas, this is where we bring in the lateral thinkers, people who think from outside the box. We need something new. How did Robert Louis Stevenson come up with the picture in his mind of a steam engine when he sat supposedly watching the kettle over the open fire in his home boiling and the lid flapping up and down because steam expands?
Mm.
But he looked at that and he saw the rocket, he saw a steam engine. If we look and see the opportunity, it's not about less pollution, it's about a whole change of life. It's still a microcosmic picture.
Mm.
The ancient calendars all talk about coming to a point now. The Inca calendar calls them Pachacutis. Every 600 or so, 500-600 years, the world turns upside down and goes to a cycle of day or light into a cycle of night or dark, summer or winter. And he anticipates this is part of the evolutionary change, the harmony and growth of the planet and everything on it. We know things are happening. We know something is going on with the Earth because we can measure the vibrational frequency of the Van Allen belt. The electromagnetic field around the Earth has shifted. Now, human beings, we will think it is a consequence of what's happening on Earth. Global warming, electromagnetic radiation, nuclear power, fossil fuels, more cows farting methane, something like that. And so we look to reduce down here. What if the electromagnetic shift is because of a shift at the level of density in the Earth? The Earth is going through an evolutionary process. It's not static. The tectonic plates continue to move.
Mm-hmm.
For indigenous people, the Earth is growing. Yeah. So if we see it through the mythological context of the Earth is going through its own natural cycles, the Earth is doing what the Earth needs to do. Yes, we have been messing things up. and leaving waste everywhere and not cleaning up after ourselves, and that has a consequence. But at the same time, maybe to step into the next cycle, what we need is to have an appreciation, to see and become aware of the impact of our actions, not just pollution, but the way we don't own our personal actions, our emotions, our feelings, the way we put ourselves down and project onto other people. Someone hits me, I'm going to kick the dog. Well, no, I'm not going to, but metaphorically. Perhaps to step into the next stage, if there is such a thing, then we need to look back and see the consequences of our, the antecedents of what we're creating, so that we can have an appreciation that, we have a choice. We can carry on doing the same thing, and this is the probable outcome. Carry on affecting the climate in this way, and this is the probable outcome. Or we can say that maybe there are lots of things collaborating, and the purpose is to help us to become aware, not just of our actions, but of a bigger cycle that's going on. We're not the only ones evolving. The Earth is evolving. Perhaps our continued presence on the Earth isn't necessary for the Earth's evolution, and human beings will become extinct in the same way we might have done had we not discovered fire, or where did the inspiration for creating fire come from? And the interesting thing is that it seems that it wasn't just in one place, but in several places all over the world at the same time, spontaneously, unless someone was going around, very fast on horseback or sending out Neolithic emails saying, look, here's the update. We worked it out. This is how you make fire. If you put 100 monkeys in a room, and give them typewriters, they say eventually one of them will type out the works of Shakespeare. By chance or by design, I don't know. But if you put a group of people in a room and you task them with solving a problem and measure the amount of time it takes, and then you take them out of the room and you bring a different group of people into the same room, it seems to be proven that it takes them less time to solve the same problem the first group solved, even though they've never met that group, because it's in the field, and the third group even faster. So something gets held in the field. It's non-physical. It's vibration, it's energy. And so if we can tap into the information in the field, which is the same as having an animistic relationship, if we can learn, what is the wind saying to me? What are the clouds saying? You could look, the forest-dwelling people in South America, the Amazon, they look at the clouds over the mountains. Now, those clouds represent not just the rain that is going to fall, but it might represent the spirits, the wisdom of the ancestors. It doesn't die with them, but becomes a reservoir of wisdom at the top of the mountains. So when you see, perhaps as a result of climate change, that the clouds are getting smaller, so there's going to be less rain, less water down here, 100 miles away, 1,000 miles away. We're going to have smaller rivers. We're going to have drought. There'll be no fishing. Or you could say, we're concerned because the wisdom of the ancestors is leaving. So we need to do something. We need to tell the rest of the world that we're losing access to the wisdom of our ancestors. And the wisdom of our ancestors is what helps to inform us of new ways of doing things we haven't learned in this lifetime. So I think animism is a lived experience, whatever tradition and culture it's part of, has huge opportunities to benefit people. But it might begin as a concept, but I don't think it's ever going to grow roots in our lives unless we have an experience, a way of experiencing it. So like you say, how to do it. And I think this is why also, there is a time, the vibration of the world for me seems to be such that it is encouraging people to be curious, to wonder, to want to live differently. And maybe that's not just as a direct result of of creating a less supporting and less hospitable environment for life. Climate change is going to get it's going to impact on this and might become less comfortable to live in. But it's part of a bigger picture of evolution, of all life, of the planet, and of human beings, and our part within this. Interestingly, some years ago, when I was living in South Wales, I remember reading something from one of the members of the Welsh Assembly. And so we look at, as an example of people's particular worldview, smaller or bigger. And he said, well, almost putting on my Welsh accent then, he said, global warming will have significant benefits for the people of Wales because we have a lot of high ground. And if the sea level rises, then Wales will continue to be a centre for tourism. And even if the sea level rises, people will be flocking to Wales to come and enjoy the coasts and the beaches at the new higher level. So maybe that's true, but it doesn't take into account the rest of the world that lives on floodplains or near the coast. But that's his picture. We educate ourselves and we encourage other people to collude with our consensus of reality, because then we don't have to change. We can even ignore things that are happening around us and in our body. It's not my job. Let someone else. Can't someone else do it? It's not my job. That's what the politicians do. That's what the environmentalists do. I just go to work. I just do my thing. I do my job. Someone else does that. I don't have to think about it. It's too much for me to think about. I'm stressed. I'm blah, 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 blah. We become victims and powerless in our own lives. An animistic relationship changes the way you feel about the way you live, changes the way you feel about the world that you live in. It does, I believe, increase our sense of responsibility for the world we live in. And so then either we fight against it and deny it, or we say, I'm going to do something about it.
Fair enough. So I'm just processing a little bit. Interviews like this always worry me because I feel like I have to kind of think a second.
So maybe you're not thinking, maybe you're wondering.
I think I probably am, to be fair.
And it means that you're using a non-linear way of thinking. To get your assignment written, you're going to have to work in a linear way, because that's the way your assignment's going to be critically appraised. Does it follow a particular recognized and appreciated process? So, perhaps one thing helps the other, in writing the assignment and having drawn from the thoughts and experiences of several people, or just me, or whatever. One of the qualities of living in an animistic relationship with the world, or having an animistic relationship with life, seems to be that it encourages a different way of thinking, sometimes less linear and more circular, or less certain about facts and more inclusive about possibility, less about what's probable. What's probable is that tomorrow will be exactly the same as today, but because we're looking at problems, it'll have a minor improvement. We'll improve a little bit. But what if you can step outside of time and space somehow? For that, time and space have to be non-linear, which is what all indigenous people will tell you. Time is like a circle or a spiral. You can step out of time, which means that you can connect with the past and you can connect with all possible futures. So there are probable futures, and the probable future is based on what is likely to happen if the momentum, thoughts, beliefs, past experiences in our life is the only thing that drives us forwards. If we drop the baggage of the past and are not driven forwards, we find ourselves sitting and not knowing what to say next, wondering. Our critical appraisal of ourselves will say, right, I have to come up with an answer. I have to think about something. I have to put it together. I have to concentrate. But actually what we're doing is concentrating on something from somewhere else. And we start to wonder about possibilities.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can track a possible future for yourself, so a possible and percentage-wise, I don't know how probable future is that we will all stop doing everything that contributes towards global climate change in what we see as a detrimental way.
Mm.
Okay. It is a percentage of probability, and that percentage changes every time something happens or someone thinks about it.
Mm-hmm.
But instead of incremental changes, we could do this, and we do this, and we do this. What if we could track the highest destiny for ourselves and for all life and the planet? And then from that place, look straight back so we can see the most direct path to it.
Yeah.
Like finding the buffalo. Of course, we know where the buffalo usually go. We could go there first, but they're not there. They were here. They might be coming here, but we won't know until they get here. If we can work out the highest destiny, the biggest hunt, where are they going to be, and then take the direct route there, then we bring the desired future outcome closer towards the present. But that future outcome, the highest future outcome, may be much bigger and more than just changing the direction of climate change. It might be evolving with it.
Yeah.
It might be changing the way that we see the world that we live in, changing the way we see ourselves. Climate change, which, maybe is irreversible. Maybe the planet will rebalance it. Some of our modern fiction. So if you think of them as possible mythologies like the Day After Tomorrow and 2012, they're disaster movies, but they also present opportunities, but they present opportunities that occur through catastrophe. And through human history, we seem to remember that change happens as a result of catastrophe or revolution. And the information, the mythology of ancient people is that it can happen in a different way. We can have evolution without revolution.
Yeah. So I really quite like that idea that climate change is not just a danger, but also an opportunity. Like, that's not really a way I've thought about it before, and I think that's definitely something I'm going to include, because it's no, I think it's rather fitting, to be honest with you, because the only way, in my personal opinion, that we're ever going to beat it, if that's what we need to do, is to change the way that we understand our relationship with the planet. Because at the moment, it's very, just linking back to Christianity, the idea of dominion, right? That we've been given this earth by God or whatever creator, and that it is ours to do with as we please. Whereas it reverses the idea of stewardship, that we're meant to look after it, that kind of thing. And I think the idea that we're meant to adjust that this is actually an opportunity for us to adjust our relationship and learn to improve, how we interact with the persons with which we share the planet, rather than just looking at it as another problem to solve. I think that's really nice, actually. I quite like that.
Yeah, I think I would imagine it's probably pre-Christian, at least Judeo-Christian.
Yeah.
There's the Old Testament, which is part of Christianity, are some of the books of the Hebrew Jewish traditions. The oldest written and on tablets of stone, the oldest written stories they're Sumerian.
Yes.
The oldest written stories that we know of, at the moment. Maybe there's
Cool.
something we haven't
That
found.
would be Gilgamesh, wouldn't it? The Sumerian one.
I think I'm not an expert. What I know about are the stories of Inanna.
Mm-hmm.
So Inanna was queen of the Summerland of Sumeria.
Yeah.
But all of the stories, they talk about the relationship between the people and the earth. When the queen goes into the underworld to visit her dark twin, her sister Ereshkigal, then her husband Dumuzi takes over, sits on the throne. But in all of the ancient mythologies, when Demeter goes into the underworld, for Persephone, then everything up here dies. So the gods plead with her, but she says, "I'm not returning unless you let Persephone come back with me." So the twist in the story was that Hades, now also known as Pluto, since the Romans went to Greece and took over, it's like that's a whole other thing. But,
that kind of history really has always really interested me. So,
but it gets more interesting if you go to Greece and you go to visit the Plutonian. So I try to remember the name. So these are all part of the Eleusinian mysteries. So you want to go to, what's the name of the place? Eleusis, something. It's a place north of Athens. And then there's another one that is way out to the west, but not as far as the Peloponnese. And they all hold these stories, amazing stories that they're not part of our kind of contemporary understanding of our common shared cultures. But Persephone was then invited to speak for herself about what she wanted. But Hades had been giving her pomegranate seeds. And the pomegranate seed has an affinity with the lower world. And it said anyone who eats pomegranate seeds falls in love with the lower world. So she said, "No, I like it here. I want to stay. I like my new husband." And so Demeter agreed that she would return for half the year. And the other half, she would be with her daughter. And mythologically, this is the creation of the seasons.
Of the seasons, yeah.
So planetary environmentalists will tell us that's not how the seasons were created. It's to do with the relationship between the tilt of the Earth, which is to do with the binding effect, gravity, right? This is the serpent's power, and the moon. And so we have weather patterns, and we have intensity or reduction of sun, and this is what creates the seasons. But our mythology is that it's created out of the interrelationship between gods, but corporeal gods, and the more mundane and more physical, the humans, the land, the life, the earth. So there's an interrelationship. But there's a point in time where we seem to become more scientific, more intellectual, and things that had less of a scientific basis gained less value because it cannot be proven, in that way. Philosophy, some might say philosophy is the death of imagination.
I don't think I've heard that one before, actually.
No, I just made it up.
Oh, right. I was going to say, I'm not familiar with that.
To think, okay, we have to think. If we're going to think, then how do we organize which part of our brain or our mind we're going to use to think about? If we're thinking about what to do next, and it's based on what's happened before, then it's more a reorganization of memories.
Yeah.
And the thing that's in front of us is not the future, it's the past.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
Or just
So if we're
reference.
facing a problem, a situation that there is no solution in our past that helps with, then we don't know what to do, and we will go to our responses of protest, fight, express our anger, our discontent. Everyone knows we're not happy, but there's no new information about what to do. So this is why I think it's important to dream, because dreaming, daydreaming in particular, we are able to dream a new world into beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And in those daydreamy kind of moments, we begin to notice things in different ways, and they have different significance. Yeah. So Robert Louis Stevenson, did it actually happen? I don't know. But the Robert Louis Stevenson story, he's sitting there, the fire is in front of him, and the kettle is boiling, and he's looking at it, and he's not picking the kettle up and stopping the water boiling over into the fire. He's just looking at it, and he's captivated by the movement, the animism. There is a force moving it. And now we have steam engines, and those steam engines, the steam locomotive engines were replaced by diesel locomotives and diesel electric, and now we have electric cars.
Mm-hmm.
So it all comes from the idea of how do we create movement? So we need to harness a force that does it. And so the image, the experience of gazing at the image and the interaction between the kettle and the fire and the steam and the water created inspiration for something new, something that we had never had before. And if animism has a part to play in relation to climate change, then perhaps it's in helping to make aware something we haven't seen, something we don't know from before,
mm-hmm.
or something we've lost track of.
No, indeed.
The Inca cosmology offers us a completely different way of experiencing the world we live in, and it leads to living differently. One of the things that stands out are their understanding of anatomy in a pre-modern scientific context. So for them, the front of the body represents the past, and the back represents the future. Let's think, why? What's this all about? Because mostly we're walking forwards into what we already know. We're creating another version of the past. If we want something new, we have to turn around.
Okay.
Yep. So stepping into Inca cosmology becomes an initiation, because you start to experience differently. You start to wonder, you start to think differently.
Mm-hmm.
The Runasimi languages, the Quechuan language, part of the Runasimi languages, the Andean languages, have some similarities for me with Sanskrit.
Yeah.
So they're ancient languages. Quechuan was never written down until the Spanish arrived, and then it's written phonetically in the style of Spanish interpretation.
Okay.
Sanskrit has been written down for a lot longer, but
Indus Valley Sanskrit, yeah. So Sanskrit was the Indus Valley. Am I right in?
Yes.
Yeah. All right.
Okay. So there's a lot of interest. So the Q'ero people look different to other Andean people. And they look much more like Siberian, Mongolian. They look more like people from the Indus Valley. They look like some African people.
Mm-hmm.
And their story is they don't come from the land they live in now. We know they're really interested in the sun. Inti, the Inca was the embodiment of Inti, the sun. Mm-hmm. Each syllable in the Quechuan language has an individual meaning, the same as Sanskrit.
Right.
So a word from Sanskrit that's quite frequently used in our European day-to-day, North American everything, is pranayama. It's specific to yoga practices. But some people will say pranayama, oh, it's breathing practices, which mostly is how it presents. But pranayama in Sanskrit doesn't translate as breathing practices. It's got nothing to do with breath. But prana and yama, they have meanings that a lot of people understand, but it might be a slightly smaller number of people who say breathing practices. Yama, students of yoga, or many Indian people might understand yama and niyama. They're two complementary principles about control and restraint, what you do and what you don't do, observations. And in the Ashtanga, the 8-limbed yoga of Patanjali, so it's all written down at one point, these are the first two principles of the 8. Okay, so you could say prana is energy, yama is control. So pranayama is the control of energy. Well, that's getting a little bit more closer to it, but prana is, again, 2 syllables. Pra and ana. Ana means all physical things, and pra means that which comes before. So now pranayama becomes the control of that which comes before all physical things. So just to go through our imagination and our mythologies, what comes before all physical things? We don't know. So we have stories about the Big Bang. So maybe it's the energy of the Big Bang, the control of the energy of the Big Bang. Some people say before all physical things, there was only God. So then it becomes the control of the kind of God principle energy, embodying it, connecting with it. The Inca talk about Kausai in the same way, Kausai prana, the life force energy. So really pranayama is the control of the life force energy that existed before matter was created. So it kind of adds another dimension to sitting there and breathing in and out. Think, oh, I'm controlling the life force energy of the universe inside my body. When the world turns over every 600 years, the Kero call it Pachakuti. Kuti means to turn over. And Pacha, popularly we think of it as Pachamama, so Mother Earth, Mama, we understand as mother. Pachamama, mother of the earth. But Pa and Cha, 2 separate meanings. They mean space and time.
All right.
So now Pachamama is the mother, or Mama, mother of the mother of space and time. And Pachakuti is the turning over of all space and time, not just the earth. Okay. And our experience of life, of the present, of the past, and of the future is based on fixed time, because we're always somewhere at some time, and fixed time, because time, we believe that time is linear and we can only walk through time one day at a time. You wake up and it's a different day. You look at your watch and it's a different time. We cannot do anything other than flow with time. But if we can step outside of time and space, as all indigenous people say, and all indigenous people live in an animistic relationship with the world around them. It doesn't just mean looking after the cows because you have to be compassionate. It's more like Hinduism or Buddhism. You have sacred animals, or all animals are sacred. Okay. More than that, it's everything. The stones, the rocks. I'm looking for you. If I sit over there, I have all the stones beside me. I'll be picking up stones and saying stones and rocks, but there's so much light there, and I'm sitting at this side. Maybe there's another reason for sitting at this side I haven't discovered yet. So the initiation into the understanding of the language, and the languages are old languages. They haven't become sophisticated and modernized and homogenized between different cultural groups of Europe. English has a lot of French, it's got a lot of Spanish, but what's the original language of this land? What's the original language of all European people? So the Kero people look more like Siberian Mongolian people. The word shaman, which is attributed to the Siberian and Mongolian languages, but is now popularly used all around the world. Shaman is for scholars of language, they will tell you that it is more likely to originate from a Sanskrit word.
Mhm.
So the shaman and their language, so shaman exists within a culture. That's why the culture names them. They don't come from Mongolia and Siberia. So the Kero haven't come from Mongolia and Siberia, but they're connected to those people and Tibetan people. A lot of them look similar. So it connects them to the Indus Valley, or maybe to the Rift Valley. Maybe the people from the Rift Valley came to the Indus Valley. It's very popular with people who live in the the Rift Valley like to think life started there. People in the Indus Valley say it started there. I like to think it starts in my back garden because it's mine.
Of course.
No, we're habituated towards our popular beliefs. They mean we don't have to change the world we live in.
Almost like we think it all originated here on this planet in the first place, kind of.
Absolutely. And the Kero will tell you that before that, we don't come from here anyway, and they point to the Pleiades in the sky.
The Pleiades?
Yes.
The
Dogon people in Africa, who were an uncontacted tribe for a long time. And when Western people met with them and were asking them about their religion, their belief, their way of life, their cosmology, they pointed to the sky and they say, well, we come from these two stars. And everyone knew that what we call the dog star, Sirius, is one star. And then shortly after, or around the same time, but unknown to the Dogons, astrophysicists with the new technology, we needed to have an innovation. They were able to see that actually, yeah, it's a binary star. There are two stars. From here, with the naked eye, it looks like one. How did these people know that unless they got the information somewhere else?
I haven't got an explanation for you. That's really interesting, actually.
Mm-hmm.
So which sorry, how did you spell that one? Just out of personal interest, that one.
Yeah. Dogon.
Dogon. All right. Sorry. So I'm going to look that up. That actually sounds really interesting. The idea they were able to predict the binary stars before they were able to.
There are many examples of these things. So the Kero say they come from the Pleiades. Now they're very interested in the sun, as all ancient indigenous people would be, because you want to know that sun is really important. It doesn't just stop you feeling cold. You know that the sun, every day it comes up there, it travels across the sky and it disappears over here. And then sometimes it's higher and sometimes it's lower. Sometimes its orbital path is shallower. Sometimes it takes longer to go across the sky. It goes higher. So if the sun comes in the east, whether you're in the north or the southern hemisphere, if you imagine a ball, right? So there's the Earth. Let's try and hold that like that. Okay. Here's the equator. We could do it like that, which makes sense to our human mind, but imagine it here. Okay. So if you're in the southern hemisphere, you look north. You see the sun at its highest point. If you're in the northern hemisphere, you look south. So there is already some difference in the sun always comes from here, travels across and disappears here. But for some, it's the left, some it's the right. So you might get curious about where the sun comes from. It might be more important than where it goes, because if you know where it comes from, then you can be in a better, stronger, closer, more informed relationship, because the sun brings fertility to the crops.
And you notice that every flower follows it across the sky. Yes,
particularly things like the sunflowers, tournesol. So it just turns to follow it. Now, we understand that there are tectonic plates, continental plates, and that Northwest America, Alaska, was connected by what are now the Bering Strait. It was connected to Siberia, Kamchatka. So while now you can't really walk from northeastern Eurasia, Siberia, Kamchatka, to Alaska, when those plates were closer together, you could do. And maybe it was,
Just the
so they could
Bering
have walked.
Strait. Yeah.
Bering Straits, they were walking maybe to find where the sun came from. And if you keep walking, you get to Greenland, Iceland, Newfoundland, and you find the Sami people, the Eskimo peoples. Maybe you go so far and you think, well, if some of you are going to go that way to find out where it comes from, well, the rest of us, we think we should go south because we know as we came north, it got smaller in the sky. So we want to go back and find where the sun is at its strongest. So maybe there's something, we just keep walking. So they walk down through America over hundreds of thousands, millions of years, who knows? But when you get into South America, there's not a lot further you can go, really.
No,
You get to Tierra del Fuego, and then you've got the ocean. So they settled somewhere, and it's a very nice place to settle. Inca, again, 2 syllables. There was only ever one Inca. So we talk about the Incas, but they were the people of the Inca. And they would have had a different name for themselves that we've lost track of. But Inca and in T, the sun is in T. So they're interested in the light of the sun, not the celestial body, the light of the sun, T. So Inca means the embodiment of the sun. In T is the light of the sun.
Right.
So it makes sense to me that they were looking for where the light of the sun comes from.
No, that makes sense. Yeah, and you can kind of see their path across that. And then, for example, when the Bering Strait was closed, I mean, if you look at Japan, the name for Japan is Nihon, which is essentially sunrise land, because it is in the east. It's the furthest you could get at that point in history. So, yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And it's kind of interesting if you look at some of like the similarities, especially between like some of the oceanic cultures and Peru, at least in idols, that kind of thing. There are certain similarities to be seen between them that don't necessarily line up with our contemporary understanding of the human migration, which creates quite an interesting idea. I mean, I've seen a fringe theory that there was a group of people who went the other way, like across the Pacific to there, and that's how certain elements of those cultures survive. But in truth, we don't really know. So
for me, I think it can be much more valuable to come up with interesting questions rather than definite answers.
Oh, agreed.
But not all scientists would agree.
No.
And quantum physics has opened up the domain of wondering.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, we have even this kind of expanding the idea of cause and effect.
And what
we have.
Yeah, because with quantum physics, the cause and effect thing is quite interesting, specifically with quantum physics, because it's starting to blur the line as to whether or not cause and effect happens because it happens, or it's happening because we observe it, which is it's not.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Observer object theory. Yes, definitely. Is light a wave or a particle?
Yeah,
depends what you're looking for.
If
you're looking for waves, that's what you'll measure. If you're looking for particles, that's what you will be able to measure, and you'll prove it. Scientists have been looking for a unified field theory. So with physics, we only have laws, and they have to be absolute. They must be reliable in any given situation. And because there's so much of the universe that we don't know, and we cannot test if these laws apply, they have come up with the best compromise for themselves, which is the bubble universe theory or concept. So within the measurable and imaginable universe, it appears that all the laws apply. But outside of that, we don't know. But as soon as you begin to look a little bit further, then the universe expands, the measurable universe, and you say, oh, yeah, we can prove that it's right. But, which one are we? Is the universe affirming our beliefs, our laws, because that's what we're looking for it to do? Or are these laws absolute?
Well, it's a question we're going to struggle to ever answer. And should we answer?
We can struggle answering if you're looking for a yes or no answer, but we can always answer with, well, possibilities and wondering. And I think that's really where animism becomes a useful, what is the word? Is it? It's a way of living.
Yeah.
Yeah. A way of experiencing, and a way it allows us to wonder with curiosity. And I think wondering and curiosity and daydreaming are very important and very sad. In my schooling, my childhood, and maybe in so many other billions and billions of children's education in school, they're taught to stop daydreaming, to pay attention, and just do as I'm telling you to do. And are these children, all of us, I think my belief is we're born to be the dreamers that we need. Do you know the story of Montezuma?
I know the name, actually. That's Inca, isn't it, Montezuma?
Aztec.
Yeah. I think I recognize the name from a game, Civilization game. But yes, I've heard the name before. I'm not familiar with the story, though.
So one of the stories, Montezuma was the last great emperor of the Aztec Empire. And in his court, in his palace, he had dreamers. And their job was to dream and to tell him what they dreamed, particularly if it was significant. So the court dreamer, had this dream about the end of the empire, and that Montezuma and his family would be killed, and their gold would be gone, and they would lose their palaces, and the world that they knew it would end. He didn't like this dream, so he had him executed.
All right.
Okay. There are going to be parallels to our modern world in this. And so then, because he wanted to know, he called the other dreamers in the court and said, okay, this is what he told me. I want you to dream and tell me what you come up with. And they had a little bit of trepidation, particularly when they came together and realized they had all dreamed the same dream. So they told him, so he killed them all. And then he summoned every dreamer from the whole of his empire and told them to dream. And they were very afraid because they all dreamed the same thing. And they were all executed. And then the Spanish came, and the end of his empire came, and they were all killed. And there were no dreamers left to dream something new. So, I suppose in there, the essence of the story is that we need dreamers, even if the dreams that they come up with are not the ones that we want. They're the ones who can dream something new. So when we are facing a probable destruction, we need something new. Doing the opposite to what we've done is just the reverse of doing the same thing.
Yeah.
We need something new. In order to match the challenge of climate change, we need something new. If all the reasons we're putting forward about changing what we're doing to halt or possibly reverse the effects of climate change were enough, we'd be doing it already, because we already know these things. All of the things people are saying come from our lived experience. We need something new. And animism offers an opportunity, one way of calling on something new.
All right, that's excellent. Thank you. Well, thank you very much for your help here. I do really appreciate it. I just realised we've been going for nearly 2 hours now, and that's just flown by, honestly. So
It's my
So,
pleasure, Lewis. My
no, I've
pleasure,
really enjoyed
certainly.
this. So hopefully
Um,
I'll